Welcome to Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co host, Ray Smith. Good afternoon, Ray.
Hello, Keith. It's good to see you and good to be here today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's just get right into it today. We have a special guest with us, and I'm going to let you introduce him.
Absolutely, we do. As you know, Keith, I talked with Alan Carr last time on this program, and he and I had a good conversation about his trip to Oak Ridge.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned we're going to have Bob Davis on today, and we're going to start with his trip to Oak Ridge and let us tell you what he thought. And I just learned it not only the time that I met with him, but he had been to Oak Ridge before. Bob was a former senior editor for the Wall Street Journal. And now he's a freelance writer that continues to write for the Wall Street Journal, but for other periodicals and articles and newspapers as well. So, Bob, we're glad to have you here. If you need to say anything more about yourself to introduce yourself, please do so. And then let's start talking about Oak Ridge.
Great. Well, thanks for the invitation, and thanks when I came down last year for being such an incredibly helpful, warm host. It was a terrific visit. So let me start a little back, or considerably back, why I got interested in Oak Ridge in the first place. So 1991, I was at the Wall Street Journal since 1982, a very long time. But in 1991, I was covering science and the energy department science programs. So it's the end of the Cold War, and I get a call from an energy department official. I think his name was Brian Siebert, actually, comes back to me. And they were looking to show how the national labs and the national factories used to produce nuclear weapons could be useful to private industry. And so I represented the Wall Street Journal, right? It would be the obvious place, to try to get a little publicity. They invited me down. We came to Oak Ridge and we went into Y-12. I believe, Ray, you would know better than me, but I believe I was the first journalist in the innards of Y-12 after the Cold War, and it was an amazing trip. Again, I was covering science, but I'm not a scientist, and I'm certainly not an engineer. But my main memory of this is, I was very excited about it, right? And but I had no idea what to do or what to expect. I get there, and I now realize Y-12 is more than one building. So I don't know which building I was in, but it was a building with a lot of machine tools, right? And then half of the they clearly had given the staff the day off. Half of the factory was behind yellow curtains. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm walking around, do they really think that I would know what a secret is? I mean, the things that they would care about, like the tolerances, how you machine things out of lithium or whatever. Sure, I understand that secret, but there's no way I would conceivably understand that. What I saw were, devices that made really round balls, they were really good at it. I mean, really good at it. But it was just an amazing experience for me to see what to me seemed like another world, a different world. So I went with Siebert to Oak Ridge. We went to Los Alamos, we went to Sandia, and one other. I don't remember which one. But it was great. I mean, it was an amazing trip around the nuclear weapons complex. Right. But as I said, the other world part of it was remarkable to me. So I at one place, I remember talking to a production person who told me that, this is several years before, during the Reagan administration, that the whole complex was shut down because some widget that they produced, they had some problem with the machinery and it just wasn't producing it. And so they couldn't produce the weapons or upgrade them, whatever they had to do. And they talked about what was then called the window of vulnerability. That the view was during the Reagan administration that for a time the Soviets were ahead of us and we were vulnerable until we, caught up. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, like they really took that seriously, like as a member of the public, it's like, yeah, I heard it. I mean, I heard the newspaper articles. I wasn't covering it myself, but I didn't think of it as honestly that big a deal. But for them, they're working 24/7 to try to, fix the problems that they had. And that was one of my main takeaways, was what an interesting parallel world to the world that civilians live outside of this complex. And I thought about that honestly for years and years and years. Then I wound up retiring from the Journal in 2022. And, somehow I could get to the stories that I always meant to do. And I thought to myself that it would be really interesting to go back to Oak Ridge and Y12 and see what you could see as a tourist, right? What was available to a tourist. I also went to the Nevada test site, which I'd been for a different story. God, that was back in around 1986 when they were actually still doing nuclear tests. And I went down into into basically a cave, or like a mining shaft, I guess, where they had put or about to put a device. I'm not sure they actually ever set it off, but again, a part of the United States that other people couldn't see. So that was my motivation to come down here and to write about what I called atomic tourism, which I think is just really a fascinating subject.
It's interesting. It's interesting, Bob. You were talking about, and Ray has to be careful because Ray worked at Y12 about his whole career. I didn't, so I don't have a dog there. But the thing about it is, you were talking about, how they were so concerned about certain things. My impression is, and I don't know enough about it to really have an impression, but my impression is, I mean, mixed in with all the technology and all the precision and work that they were doing and everything, you've got bureaucracy and politics, and all those things are kind of mixed in together. So it's a really interesting culture out there that I've discovered. So
yeah, no, yes, I agree.
So Bob, Keith got the opportunity to come into Y12 and film some of the equipment, old equipment. Now, he was doing the documentary back in 2005, 2006 kind of time frame, and he got to go in and actually film some of the things that we included in the film that he made, the Oak Ridge story, the Manhattan Project, or the War Years is the name of it. And after he had done that, he was moving on to something else, and all of a sudden, he had a visit from some of our folks at Y12.
Yeah.
Something behind me there fell off. But at any rate, he got a visit because they had discovered that there might possibly have been some information gone out with him that was not intended to be for the public.
Yeah, so, and they were Y12 was really, they worked with me really, really well. I mean, they gave me old footage and things such as that I could use in the documentary. And I had returned the footage, and I think it was discovered, Ray, probably about a year later.
Yeah,
that I had been in possession, because I didn't work for them. I don't have a Q clearance. I don't work for the federal government. And so it took a full day of, I won't call it interrogation, but investigation. And had to work with several different people to determine that no, even if I had, and I think this is Ray's point. Even if I had no idea what it was, and even if I had seen it, I would have had no idea what it was.
That's correct.
Absolutely no idea what it was.
And that's one side of the issue. The other side is we, and I say we because I did work at Y12 for 47 years, and I was a derivative classifier for a part of that time. We are charged with the responsibility to protect that information from the public. Now, we don't get to decide, well, you really think we ought to do that or not? No, it's required of us to do that. And to do our job, we have to do everything we can to protect that information. And obviously, we classify information that's something that should not be seen by the public, but we'll also be conservative and classify maybe more information than you might think was necessary. But to be on the safe side, we need to protect it. So if you get a piece of it and we know you got it, we're going to come get it.
You know, it's interesting, Ray, and I know for a fact that there have been photographs, and this is kind of in reference to what I was saying earlier, photographs and drawings and things, diagrams and things such as that have been published on the internet.
Yeah.
That were later deemed classified. So, you know, like I said, bureaucracy. Sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, but that's.
You know, I remember during that first time, it just reminded me that I believe Ray would know this, but when I was there, I think the gaseous diffusion plant was still up or I don't know if it was operating, but there was some like filter that they used that they were, I think they might have published something, and then there was some question or some controversy of whether, you know, Saddam Hussein at that time, you know, could have used it to, you know, make nuclear material.
You're exactly right. The gaseous diffusion plant shut down in 1987, finally. So there were still operations probably when you were there. Well, no, you were there in the early 90s, 91. So it had been shut down. But you're right. There is information about that gaseous diffusion process that that was protected, and that's the reason they were careful about that.
And that was I'm sure he's talking about the barrier material, which is vital to the operation of the gaseous diffusion plant. That, I guess, Ray, is still classified today, isn't it?
Let's talk about something else.
Sorry, I can't ask him that. Let's move on.
And I want to tell you, Bob, that the Centers for Manufacturing Technology was just being put in place right after the Cold War. And that was the reason that you were brought to Y12. At one point, we had helped industry in every state in the nation in the early and the middle 90s with things like welding, dissimilar materials, machining capabilities, what the expertise that Y12 had. We deliberately tried to take that out to the nation anywhere we could find people that would let us come and let us help them. And the reason we did that was because at the end of the Cold War, there were two things that took place. One was we had to reduce a significant amount of our workforce. So we were losing technology, losing capability because of laying off people that were high senior. You know, there were people that had been there for a long while, and I had to lay off 35 people in one day. And so it went for a while that way. The second thing is there was a consideration to move Y12 to Nevada, to the test site. And now that became a political hot potato, and it made us in Oak Ridge realize that, you know, there were some 5,000 to 6,000 jobs there that were in jeopardy. There are actually over 8,000 of them there now. Working just in Y12, another 1,500 working on the construction processes for the uranium processing facility and for the new lithium facility. So there's a lot of jobs. So we made a big effort, including contacting you, to get some information out about Y12 and the importance of it to the East Tennessee region. So I know that was going on at about the same time. So you weren't the only one we engaged, but we engaged a lot of different things because during the Cold War, you know, Y12 was making all the secondaries for all the nation's nuclear weapons. And all we really wanted you to do was to give us enough money to do it and tell us how many you wanted. And that's what we would do. We never missed a production schedule the entire Cold War period. So Y12 is an amazing place, but it's had some political situations that we've had to deal with over the years. But it was good that you got to see in there, and I'm not at all surprised that they curtained off parts of it. I know exactly why they did that. And you got to see what you needed to see for your information for the article, but that's all. We didn't show you anything beyond what you needed to see.
Right. It was all about, for me, it was all, and my audience is all about the machining capabilities. No,
Yeah.
I'm glad that I am, as an American, glad that the expertise that the institution had, was able to be shared more broadly.
Right. Yeah. Understand. Okay, so that was your first trip. Now tell us about your next trip.
So the second trip, it was interesting. There were pluses and minuses, I would say. The pluses are, I saw, thanks to you and thanks to the tour, parts of American history, really, the parts where I learned what the secret city, I knew nothing about, like, the secret city and all that. It's a very, very interesting history. Also the history of Oak Ridge, in terms of, this country's fight about civil rights. That was also very interesting, which I learned about, sort of the way black workers were treated as compared to white workers. All of that was very interesting. I got to see the reactors and so on, the things that are available, and also just to get a sense of the unbelievable scale of the gaseous diffusion facility, even though there's nothing left. And I realized they're trying to figure out another way to present it visually.
Right.
So all that was terrific. I mean, really, it was terrific. The people couldn't have been nicer, but compared to the 91 visit, right? So the way I thought, so when I went to Y12, for instance, it was a visitor center. That was fine. You could see posters and that kind of stuff, but you didn't get to see what I saw. And I thought that, and then it kind of made sense to me, right? I mean, it's the wonderful thing about being a reporter. It's a great job. You get, access to things that other people just don't. And so I had access. No, I didn't. If I saw something secret, I wouldn't have had any idea. But I mean, I got a glimpse of a world that other people couldn't see, and that was great. But it's not generally open to, that part isn't generally open to the public. So it's more of an historical tour. And in that sense, it's, very interesting. I mean, it's I think everybody has a kind of ambivalent feeling toward, the Manhattan Project, right? On the one hand, it's an unbelievable scientific accomplishment during an incredibly short period of time. I mean, I think the movie Oppenheimer kind of celebrates that part. I mean, American ingenuity and know-how, and we can do it. On the other hand, it's a nuclear weapon, and if it's ever used, it kills an unbelievable amount of people. So, there's always that ambivalence toward it.
So have you seen the movie Oppenheimer?
Yeah, it's great. I thought it was terrific. It's funny about back then, 91 tour. Part of it was going to Los Alamos in particular. Again, you get, kind of behind the curtain, and I forget exactly what problems they said they could fix with, but everything that they said was a problem, you would solve it by blowing something up. And it was like, okay, I guess that's what they do. They're really good at it.
It's a nuclear weapons design laboratory. Oh, but they do so much more. Los Alamos is a huge lab, and it has several locations. 16,000 people work there now for Los Alamos. And one of the directors of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Tom Mason, is now the director at Los Alamos. And I might tell you that he had some influence in the actual decision by the Department of Energy to vacate that decision on Oppenheimer. He got the other laboratory directors, previous directors, to sign a letter with him and suggested that that would be the right thing to do. And they did that just prior to the movie coming out. And I agree with you, that Oppenheimer movie, it's a movie about a man, about Oppenheimer. And I think Christopher Nolan's done an outstanding job telling that story. And and you know, Oak Ridge got mentioned only twice, but we got a significant increase in tourism just from having that little bit of tie in to the Oppenheimer movie.
That's interesting.
We call it the Oppenheimer effect.
You know, Bob, it's interesting, and Ray is not gonna he's not gonna take credit, as much credit as he should, but really, the heritage tourism in Oak Ridge came about, I'm thinking probably around the late 90s, early 2000s. And a concerted effort was made. I mean, that's where, I mean, I'm sure it was before that, but that's when they really, all the folks involved, you know, the city folks and maybe some of the federal folks, started seeing the benefit of having a heritage tourism effort for people to come, and you know, the marketing and things such as that. Because when I made my first documentary on Oak Ridge, Secret City: The Oak Ridge Story, the War Years, and that's the reason that I called it, because our Convention and Visitors Bureau head had started marketing Oak Ridge as the Secret City, and of course Ray is undoubtedly our city's leading ambassador for heritage tourism. I mean, he's I don't know how he does it. He had to retire from his job so he could take all these folks on these tours.
That's
But
right.
you know, but yeah, it's really increased and just gradually increased. And like Ray said, you know, we've had kind of a bump after, you know, Oppenheimer this
Yeah.
summer, but but everyone has made an effort to increase access to locations, to information, to things such as that. So I think they should be commended for that.
Yes. Did you notice post Oppenheimer movie if the people coming here were younger? Because the people that I saw are pretty much retirement age.
I think that we are seeing a younger crowd. We still get a lot of retirees. I mean, in heritage tourism, you're going to see a lot of old folks, but I do believe that it picked up the interest in a younger generation, and I think I see as much of that on social media as I do in person. It just seems that there's more younger people even talking about it than there were before the movie. So I think it has had a significant impact on it.
But
Yeah.
I think also, Ray, that I mean that's just the demographic. The you know, the older folks are the demographic for historical type things. You know, for the most part. I always tell people, and I'm a historical documentary filmmaker. That's what I've done my whole career. And I tell everybody, all my groupies have blue hair. You know, so you know, that's the way it is. That's just
look at Bob. Yeah, look at Bob and me, and if you'd let yours grow out, it'd be great too.
Oh, that's true. That is true. That is true.
Bob, there are 5 museums here in Oak Ridge now. I don't think one of them was here when you were here, but it may have been. The American Museum of Science and Energy, of course, is in a location that we moved to in 2018. And then there's the Oak Ridge History Museum, which is with volunteers, the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association. Then the K-25 History Center and the Y-12 History Center. All of those open to the public. The Children's Museum is where the Manhattan Project National Historical Park is located as well. So we've got attractions for tourism coming to Oak Ridge in the way of these museums. And it's interesting to note that people coming now are choosing which museums they like the best. And it's interesting to find out when you have them on a tour, you know, what do you think about that? What turns you on about that? And I'm finding that the Oak Ridge History Museum, which tells the story of the people and of the city, is increasingly more of interest to folks coming in. Now, of course, they all still like the American Museum of Science and Energy, and the K-25 that one's one of the best museums you're going to find anywhere. But I think it's interesting to note how this this one that's the most recent one's coming along really well. So our museums are doing a good job for us.
No, I remember you took me to that one, and what stood out was I forget, I'm embarrassed to say I forget the name of it, but basically the shacks that
Oh yeah, the hutment.
right.
Yeah, the hutment.
You know, and it was just, again, you know, I'm from the North, I'm from New York.
Yeah.
I live in DC now, but I'm, you know, a New Yorker. And so I read about, you know, the history of the civil rights movement. I lived, you know, I mean, I'm old enough to have kind of lived through that in the North, but to see how Oak Ridge, you know, a city in the South kind of dealt with all that it's just very interesting.
Yeah, and I think our Scarborough 85, which is what we're calling that 1955 situation where we actually desegregated the Robertsville Junior High and the Oak Ridge High School. We didn't pay attention to that over the years like probably it should have, but we are now getting it included in all of the Tennessee history being taught in all schools in the state of Tennessee. And we're working to get it included in the Civil Rights Trail and the other civil rights museums. I think it is a really good story. And obviously, some of the people have already passed away that were a part of that 85, but we still have a few of them left with us. And we're trying to get as much recognition for them as we can. However, it is belated. We should have been doing it sooner.
Bob, what are some of the other things that you've worked on or that you're working on now?
Well, so you know, journalism,
Yeah.
it's not usually a field where there's some, you know, great career path, you know, set out early in your career, right? And so I just sort of quickly go through it. I was hired on the Journal a long time ago in 1982 when they were expanding their coverage of technology, because before that I was the editor of an incredibly obscure publication that dealt with consumer electronics. Personal computers were becoming popular and they were looking to expand. So, and I was in the Boston bureau, and then I came to Washington in 1986 and was covering science issues and through 91 or so. And then wound up covering a lot of international economics. That, to the degree my career has any sense, it is basically covering international economics. I was based in Brussels 2001 and 2. I ran our Latin America Bureau 2004 to 2007, and I was based in China from 2011 to 14. And the last 10 years, my career is basically taken up with US-China. And turns when I think back at what I covered US-China relations for a significant part of my career, going back to the Clinton years when the US and China were negotiating over China's entry into the WTO, and even before that, when the Clinton administration was trying to squeeze China so that it eased up on human rights and failed miserably in that effort. But it opened, you know, the two countries were working very, very closely together at that point through 2009. And then I covered the Trump, the China part, the China trade part of the Trump administration. So the whole trade war as well, I covered that. So quite a bit.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't help but ask you, what do you think about China today?
You know, it's so when I lived there from 2011, China's never easy. It's just to start with, you know, as a reporter, it's just never easy. But it was much easier than it is now. So when I lived there in 2011 to 14, my wife was with me. I had 2 adult children, one of whom was already teaching English in China, because at that point, it was a great people-to-people thing that nobody really, you know, it wasn't the creation of some government official in the US or China, but a lot of American kids went to China to teach English because all you had to do was know how to speak English. My son had a visa called a foreign expert's visa, and he said the only thing I'm expert in is being foreign, and so he was there. My daughter, who had graduated college about a year before, she actually beat me to China because I had visa problems, like a lot of journalists. So I had my 2 adult children. We had our 2 adult children with us in China. It was just an amazing family experience, and covering China is, so I was covering the economy of China. I didn't cover dissidents. I wasn't covering politics per se. But in some ways, I'm a Washington reporter, generally speaking, and Beijing's the capital. There are a lot of things that are similar. There are bureaucracies for the economy, and there's a central bank and so on. But the thing that's unbelievably different is the role of the Communist Party. There's just nothing like it in the United States. So half my time is trying to figure out, what the policy, what changes in economic policy they might make, just as I would in China. But you have this overlay of the party because they're the decision makers for anything important. And then that's unbelievably frustrating because whatever one thinks about the government in the US, there is, and whatever administration, whatever you're Republican, Democrat, Trump supporter or not, and for every government official, there is some sense that you have, part of your job is to explain to the public. And there's just none of that in China. But so when that got super frustrating, it's just this enormous country, just an absolutely enormous country that I could go anywhere and write stories. It was a fabulous experience, but it has gotten much, much, much harder, much harder. They have cracked down considerably. They kicked out a lot. They kicked out all the American journalists from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. They had one reporter, and we have some reporters who happen to be, Canadians or Brits or whatever. They weren't hired that way. It just turned out. So we had people who still stayed. But the reporter there's one visa now for an American, and he says, no matter what you do now, you're followed. Like I was hardly ever followed. I wasn't really worried about that sort of thing. So it's much harder. Relations are terrible. I think the pandemic showed how awful the relations are. I mean, if even during the pandemic, a global health crisis killing millions of people, if even then, we couldn't work together, it really wasn't much left. So it's a little better than that now, but things are still pretty awful actually between the 2 countries.
Wow.
I think that was a good assessment of what I think as well is a very tough situation with China today. Well, tell us about your trip to Tucson and what you were doing out there. You mentioned it earlier before we started.
So in the same way that I thought atomic tourism would be an interesting type of tourism, I'm the sort of person that if I go to a beach, I get bored in, about a day. And so my wife and I once 10 years ago with my daughter had a chance to go to it was like a bed and breakfast, but they had really big telescopes there, and they showed you how to look at the stars and take pictures of them. And it was in a place, an out of the way place in New Mexico, where the sun in an area where that is known for what they call dark sky tourism. So everybody uses red lights, and they try to keep the ambient light very low. And the Milky Way was almost bright enough to read by. And so I wanted to do something. My wife, I did this with my daughter. My wife always wanted to do something like that. So we have from China, actually, we have friends from China, one of whom is an astronomer. And he told me about this just amazing opportunity. So Tucson, we went to Tucson because Tucson is ringed by mountains on top of which are a bunch of observatories. And you can actually, it sounds crazy, but you can rent the Kitt Peak National Observatory to 4 people. You can have it for the night, and they'll give you a tour of it, and they will then show you, or not give you, but they'll have a docent with you who'll show you how to take how to see deep galaxies, planets. It's also an amazing, just looking up in the sky is unbelievable. You know, it's so brilliant. You know, I looked up and I said, you couldn't help but miss Jupiter. It's like, it was just the brightest star, the brightest object in the sky. And you think to yourself, how did I ever miss that? And then you go down to, you know, to ground level and you can't see it because, you know, the light is, you know, overwhelming. So it was great. So we rented that observatory, and then we went another night on a group tour of another observatory called Mount Lemmon. And I'm going to write, hopefully for the journal, if not them for somebody else, but about, you know, stargazing tourism. So I think it's just another kind of fun way to spend your time.
Wow.
I think that's amazing that you're doing that, and I applaud you for doing it, because there are interesting things for tourism that are little known, and you can help to promote that, especially to readers of the Wall Street Journal who may not take the time to learn about those kinds of things, but can do it if it's in the journal. And, you know, come on, reading the Wall Street Journal is part of their job. So, so they can read you and not feel guilty at all.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the idea of of a general publication, right? Is to let people know here's something interesting you might want to learn about.
Absolutely.
Bob, I can't let you go without asking you about that image on the brick wall behind you.
Oh, that is a
Tell
paint.
me what it is.
That is a painting. My wife's a journalist also, and she did a story about, God, what do they call it? It's a certain kind of art that's kind of, gosh, what do they call it? It's like native art, or not native in the sense of like American Indian native, but it's kind of,
Folk art?
yeah, sort of, but it's modern. I mean, it's,
Okay.
you know, a guy who just kind of turns them out. And we just like that kind of weird image. So that's all it is.
That's enough. That's okay. I understand. I've got a grandson who is an artist, a comic book artist.
Oh, cool.
He does some really strange things. He's actually illustrating Godzilla now. So
Wow.
I'm amazed. It's amazing what artists can do.
Yeah.
Keith,
Great.
you have anything else for Bob?
No, I don't think so. Did we have anybody lined up next, Ray?
We do. As a matter of fact, next we're going to get Ann Hagedorn. Ann Hagedorn wrote the book, The Sleeper Agent, and that is the book about George Coble.
Oh, okay.
Bob, you know who he was. He was the spy that was in Oak Ridge, and she's written a really good book about him. He did get recognized by Putin, giving him the largest, I think, the most significant civilian award after he died. But he was in Oak Ridge, so we have had Ann come and talk to us in Oak Ridge, so she's agreed to come on and talk about George Coble next. Keith.
All right, very good. All right, Bob, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. We appreciate it, and you're welcome back to Oak Ridge anytime you want.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. This is a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
All right, very good.
Okay. All right, folks, thanks for watching, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new Hidden History.